what a fantastic day it was aboard the Galactic Coalition vessel Harmony's Edge. Really, just spectacular. The kind of day that makes you question every life choice that led you to volunteer for interspecies diplomatic missions. Captain Zextar of the Vorthak Empire was having what humans might generously call a moment, though most humans would probably use far more colorful language involving creative anatomical impossibilities and suggestions about where various celestial bodies could be relocated. You see, the Vorthak are a proud warrior species, 7 feet tall, covered in iridescent scales that shimmer between deep purple and midnight blue, with 4 arms that could crush titanium like a stress ball, and claws that could carve through starship hulls like a hot knife through butter. They're the kind of species that makes other civilizations nervously check their insurance policies, update their wills, and start seriously considering career changes to safer professions like bomb disposal or volcano surfing. Magnificent in battle, terrifying in negotiation, absolutely legendary in their ability to reduce enemy fleets to cosmic debris with the casual efficiency of a particularly aggressive food processor. There was just one tiny, insignificant, completely inconsequential problem with Captain Zextar's current mission. His cubs were aboard. All 12 of them. And oh my stars and garters, what precious little angels they were. If by precious little angels, you mean 4-foot-tall scaled hurricanes of pure concentrated chaos who could bite through military-grade armor, plating, and thought that destroying furniture was not just a delightful recreational activity, but possibly their calling in life. The Vorthak, you see, mature differently than most species. Their young spend the first 15 years of their lives in what biologists politely term the destructive phase, and what everyone else calls why did we agree to this mission again and where did we put that emergency alcohol stash. Dr. Elena Vasquez, xenobiologist extraordinaire and the sole human representative on this particular diplomatic escort mission, was discovering this firsthand with all the enthusiasm of someone watching their tax return get audited by sadistic accountants. She sat in the ship's common area, watching with the kind of detached fascination usually reserved for natural disasters, train wrecks, or politicians attempting to explain basic economics, as the cubs systematically demolished every piece of soft furniture they could sink their adorable little fangs into. "This is perfectly normal behavior," Captain Zextar rumbled, his deep voice carrying the sort of parental exhaustion that transcends species barriers and probably violates several laws of thermodynamics. "Young Vorthak must destroy to learn. It is our way." He said this while one of his offspring, a particularly energetic specimen named Krixtal, was enthusiastically shredding what had once been a rather expensive ergonomic cushion designed for multi-species comfort and guaranteed to support beings with up to 6 different body configurations. Foam stuffing drifted through the recycled air like the saddest snow you've ever seen. The kind that makes you contemplate the futility of existence and wonder why cushions even bother trying to maintain structural integrity. "Oh, absolutely normal," Elena agreed, dodging a flying piece of pillow that had been launched by little Vexara, whose aim was unfortunately quite good for a 6-year-old and who showed promising potential for a future career in siege warfare. Perfectly reasonable. Nothing says interspecies diplomacy like watching furniture die a slow, painful death while making the kind of sounds that would make a banshee file a noise complaint. The cubs had been at it for 3 standard days now. 3 long, exhausting, furniture-murdering days of methodical, thorough, almost artistic destruction that would have impressed the greatest military strategists in galactic history. They'd started with the throw pillows in the recreation area. Fair enough, Elena had thought at the time. Throw pillows are practically asking to be destroyed. It's right there in the name. What else are you supposed to do with something called a throw pillow except throw it around until it surrenders to the inevitable? Then they'd moved on to the meditation cushions in the spiritual reflection chamber. A bit concerning, Elena had admitted. But hey, maybe they were just exploring different textures, conducting some sort of informal materials science experiment that would revolutionize our understanding of fabric tensile strength under aggressive biting conditions. But when they'd launched a coordinated assault on the captain's personal sleeping platform, Elena had begun to suspect this might be more than casual curiosity. This was strategic. This was purposeful. This was 12 small beings with the tactical planning abilities of seasoned generals and the moral restraint of particularly ambitious termites. The cubs worked with military precision that would have made their warrior ancestors weep with pride and probably demand immediate battlefield promotions. One would distract the adult supervision with adorable chirping sounds and those big golden eyes that could melt the heart of a Kragnoth war criminal. Another would scout the target, circling it with the focused intensity of an apex predator evaluating prey. And the rest would move in for the kill like a perfectly choreographed dance of destruction, each cub knowing exactly their role in the beautiful, terrible symphony of furniture demolition. The problem, Captain Zextar continued, attempting to extract his youngest son Mordek from inside what had previously been a decorative floor cushion and was now more accurately described as a crime scene, is that their teething phase coincides with their territory establishment instincts. They must bite everything too, claim it, and understand its place in their environment. "Ah, yes, of course," Elena said, watching as Yiltha and Nexavon tag-teamed a particularly stubborn accent pillow with the ruthless efficiency of professional furniture assassins. "And I suppose the fact that they're doing this in a confined space with limited replacement options is just part of the learning experience? Like a very expensive, very destructive educational program that nobody signed up for." The captain's secondary arms gestured in what Elena had learned was the Vorthak equivalent of a helpless shrug, the kind of gesture that parents across the universe make when their offspring have exceeded their ability to explain or control. We had hoped that providing them with acceptable alternatives would redirect their instincts. Those acceptable alternatives were currently scattered around the common area in various states of complete and utter annihilation. Specially designed Vorthak chew toys that looked like they could double as medieval weapons lay in pieces that suggested they'd been processed through some sort of industrial shredder. Interactive puzzle feeders that were supposedly indestructible and backed by a warranty that was clearly written by optimistic liars had been very thoroughly destructed in ways that defied the basic laws of physics. Even the so-called military-grade entertainment devices that had survived actual battles against the hegemony forces had surrendered to the cubs' relentless assault with what could only be described as dignity. "Well, they're certainly thorough," Elena observed, as little Zareth discovered that the human-designed reading chair had particularly satisfying stuffing that made delightful, squeaky sounds when properly masticated. "Very methodical. I admire their commitment to the craft. Really, if furniture destruction ever becomes an Olympic sport, these kids are going to sweep the medals." The truth was, Elena was trying very hard not to find the whole situation endearing, but she was losing that battle more decisively than the Centauri peace accords had lost to basic common sense. The cubs were undeniably adorable in their destructive enthusiasm. They made little chirping sounds when they found a particularly good piece of fabric to tear, sounds that were somewhere between dolphin laughter and the purring of very small, very violent cats. Their scales caught the light beautifully as they twisted and pounced, creating little rainbows across their bodies that would have been breathtaking if you could ignore the carnage they were creating. And when they looked up at her with those large golden eyes after demolishing something particularly expensive, they had an expression of such pure, innocent satisfaction that it was hard to be genuinely angry with them, even when calculating the replacement costs in your head. But Elena was also practical. She was a scientist, after all, trained in observation and analysis, and she'd spent enough time studying various species across 3 different galaxies to recognize a problem that needed solving when she saw one. The cubs weren't sleeping well. Oh, they were tired from all the destruction, certainly, exhausted from their daily campaigns against the forces of furniture everywhere. But they were also restless, agitated, displaying signs of stress that any xenobiologist worth their degree would recognize. They'd destroyed every soft surface they could find, working through the ship's inventory of comfortable objects with the methodical thoroughness of a cosmic audit. But instead of settling down satisfied with their accomplishments, They seemed increasingly frustrated. Like artists who'd run out of canvas, or writers who'd run out of words, or furniture destroyers who'd run out of furniture. "Captain," Elena said, dodging another expertly aimed piece of foam while simultaneously taking mental notes about Vorthak throwing accuracy development in juveniles. "May I ask what the Cubs use for sleeping arrangements on your homeworld?" Zextar's expression shifted to something that might have been embarrassment if Vorthak could experience such an emotion, though Elena suspected that any species capable of raising 12 simultaneously destructive offspring had probably evolved past the ability to feel shame about parenting challenges. Traditionally, young cubs sleep in communal nests made from materials they have processed themselves. The act of preparing their sleeping space is essential for proper rest cycles and psychological development. Ah. Elena nodded slowly, the pieces beginning to fit together in her mind like a puzzle made of behavioral psychology and interspecies biology. And here they are in pre-made furniture on a sterile spacecraft with nothing to properly process into nest material. No wonder they're frustrated. They're trying to follow instinct, but the environment isn't providing the right resources. "The situation is suboptimal," the captain admitted with the kind of diplomatic understatement that could describe a supernova as a minor stellar adjustment, just as Krikstal managed to completely eviscerate the last remaining throw pillow in the common area with surgical precision. The cub looked around with obvious disappointment, as if wondering why the universe had failed to provide more things to destroy, like a customer at a restaurant who'd finished their meal but was still hungry. Elena watched the 12 cubs mill around the devastated common area, their frustration palpable in the way they moved, restless and unsettled. They'd done what instinct told them to do, followed the programming written into their DNA by millions of years of evolution, but it hadn't achieved what they needed. They were like little furry hurricanes who'd run out of trailer parks to demolish, or artists who'd been given crayons but no paper. The behavioral patterns were becoming clear to Elena's trained eye. The cubs weren't just destructive for the sake of destruction. They were trying to create something, to build a proper sleeping environment using the only methods they knew. But every piece of furniture on the ship was wrong for their purposes. Too artificial, too processed, too removed from the natural materials their instincts demanded. "Right then," Elena said, standing up and brushing foam bits off her uniform like dandruff from the world's most expensive pillow fight. "I'll be back in a moment. Don't let them start on the wall panels while I'm gone." She headed to her personal quarters, ignoring Captain Zextar's curious rumble behind her, and the sound of 12 small beings discovering that chair legs made interesting chewing sounds. Elena's quarters were modest but comfortable, designed to human specifications with her own personal belongings from Earth. Most importantly, her own pillow. Not just any pillow, mind you, but her pillow. The one she'd had since university, that had traveled with her through 3 different relationships, 2 career changes, 4 research stations, and now across half the galaxy on diplomatic missions that apparently included acting as an unpaid furniture consultant to alien children. She picked it up, held it for a moment, feeling the familiar softness that had comforted her through countless nights of homesickness, research stress, and the occasional existential crisis about her place in the universe. It was perfectly broken in, molded to her preferences through years of use, and absolutely irreplaceable in any practical sense. There were probably bits of her DNA in that pillow, microscopic traces of every place she'd ever slept, every dream she'd ever had. She sighed, then laughed at herself. Here she was, a trained xenobiologist with advanced degrees in interspecies behavioral analysis, and she was getting sentimental about a pillow when there were 12 miserable, exhausted alien cubs who needed help. Science, she reminded herself, sometimes required sacrifice, even if that sacrifice was a really, really good pillow. When she returned to the common area carrying her pillow, every eye in the room focused on her with laser intensity. The cub's golden gazes locked onto the object in her arms like targeting systems acquiring a high-priority objective. Even Captain Zextar tilted his massive head curiously, his forearms crossing in an expression she'd learned meant heightened interest. The air in the room seemed to change, charged with anticipation. "Here you go," Elena announced cheerfully, tossing the pillow into the center of the destroyed furniture graveyard like she was feeding time at the zoo. "Fresh victim. Have at it. Show me what you've got." What happened next was both exactly what she'd expected and somehow more wonderful than she'd imagined possible. The 12 cubs descended on her pillow like the universe's most adorable pack of piranha. But instead of the chaotic free-for-all she'd witnessed with the other furniture, this was different. This was special. This was ritualistic. They worked together, almost ceremoniously, with a coordination that spoke of deep instinctual programming. Each cub took a turn, not fighting for access, but waiting patiently for their moment, carefully biting and pulling at the fabric with deliberate precision. They weren't just destroying, they were processing, transforming, creating something new from what she'd given them. "Oh," Captain Zextar said softly, his voice carrying a note of wonder that Elena had never heard from the normally stoic warrior. "Oh, I see. I understand now." The cubs weren't just destroying Elena's pillow. They were processing it, working together to transform it into something that met their biological and psychological needs. As Elena watched, fascinated by the behavioral display unfolding before her, they began arranging the pieces they'd created, building what could only be described as a nest. Little Mordek carefully positioned a piece of fabric here, his small claws precise and deliberate, while Yiltha and her siblings arranged stuffing there with the focused intensity of architects working from ancient blueprints. It was collaborative, instinctive, and absolutely fascinating from a behavioral standpoint. Elena found herself taking mental notes, observing the way each cub seemed to know exactly what their role was in the process, how they communicated through subtle chirps and body language, coordinating their efforts without any apparent hierarchy or conflict. "The pillow carries your scent," Captain Zextar explained, his voice softer than Elena had ever heard it, filled with something that might have been reverence. "To them, you have just provided nesting material from a trusted pack member. This is a great honor in our culture. What you have done transcends simple kindness." Elena felt something warm bloom in her chest as she watched the cubs work, something she hadn't expected and couldn't quite name. It was more than scientific satisfaction, more than the pleasure of solving a behavioral puzzle. She was witnessing something profound and ancient, a ritual that connected these small beings to their evolutionary heritage, and she'd been allowed to play a crucial role in it. "Well," she said, trying to keep her voice light despite the sudden tightness in her throat, "I'm glad my pillow could finally find its true calling in life. Always suspected it was destined for greatness. Never imagined it would be as alien baby furniture, but life's full of surprises." As the cubs continued their careful work, Elena noticed that their chirping had changed. Instead of the excited, almost frantic sounds they'd been making while destroying the furniture, these were softer, more melodic. Content sounds, happy sounds, the kind of sounds that made something deep in Elena's chest feel warm and protective. Even though she'd never had children of her own and had never particularly thought she wanted any. Are they actually purring?" Elena asked, because that's exactly what it sounded like. 12 little engines of destruction had turned into 12 little engines of the most adorable sound in the universe, a rumbling harmony that seemed to resonate in her bones. "Young Vorthek purr when they feel safe and content," Captain Zextar confirmed, his own voice carrying a note of relief that spoke to weeks of worry about his offspring. "I have not heard them purr since we left homeworld. I had begun to fear they would not adapt to life aboard ship." The nest building continued for another hour, with the cubs making minute adjustments and improvements to their construction with the focused dedication of master craftsmen. They'd transformed Elena's pillow into something that looked like a cross between a bird's nest and the most comfortable blanket fort ever conceived. A perfect circle of soft materials arranged with mathematical precision and artistic flair. And then, As if responding to some invisible signal that only they could perceive, all 12 cubs settled into their creation. The purring intensified, creating a symphony of contentment that filled the common area with sound unlike anything Elena had ever heard. Elena had heard a lot of sounds in her career spanning multiple star systems and dozens of species. The haunting calls of the crystal whales of Andromeda 7, voices that could carry across light years and supposedly predict the future. The complex mathematical songs of the geometric entities near the galactic core, music that existed in 11 dimensions and could solve equations just by being heard. The terrifying war cries of the Kragnoth battle fleets, sounds that could literally frighten enemies to death. But this was something special. This was 12 tired babies finally feeling safe and comfortable, settling down for the first real rest they'd had in days, maybe weeks. Within minutes, they were all asleep. 12 small-scaled bodies curled around each other in the nest they'd built from her pillow, purring softly in their dreams like the galaxy's most dangerous kittens. Their scales shimmered gently in the ambient lighting, creating subtle patterns of color that shifted with their breathing. The common area, which had been a war zone of destruction just hours before, was now peaceful except for the gentle rumble of content sleeping cubs. "Dr. Vasquez," Captain Zextar said quietly, his voice carrying a formal weight that made Elena look up at him. "What you have done, providing nesting material to young who are not your own, this creates bonds of kinship in our culture. These cubs will remember you always as part of their pack family. You are no longer merely a colleague on this mission. You are family." Elena looked down at the sleeping cubs, at the nest they'd built from her old university pillow, and felt something she hadn't expected. Pride, affection, some strange cross-species maternal instinct she didn't know she possessed. Whatever it was strong enough to make her eyes water slightly, which she blamed on the foam particles still floating in the air. They just needed to be able to build something instead of just destroying things, she said softly, watching little Zareth shift in his sleep, one small clawed hand still clutching a piece of pillow fabric like a security blanket. Sometimes the urge to tear things apart is really just the urge to make something new, something better, something that meets your needs in ways that pre-made solutions never can. Captain Zextar made a sound that might have been Vorthak laughter, a deep rumbling that complemented the cubs' purring. "You understand my people better than most diplomats who have studied us for years, who have written dissertations about our culture without ever truly comprehending what drives us." Elena settled into one of the few remaining intact chairs, a piece of furniture that had apparently been deemed unworthy of destruction by the cubs' discerning tastes. She watched them sleep, noting how they arranged themselves in a perfect circle with their heads pointing inward, how their breathing had synchronized, how their purring created harmonics that seemed to resonate with the ship's engines. "Well, I've always found that most behavioral problems have practical solutions if you think about them from the right angle," she said, pulling out her tablet to make some preliminary notes about what she'd observed. "Your cubs weren't being destructive for the sake of it. They were trying to meet a biological and psychological need with inadequate resources. The furniture wasn't the problem. It was the wrong kind of furniture for what they needed to do. And now they rest peacefully for the first time since leaving home," the captain observed, his voice carrying a mixture of gratitude and wonder. "Thanks to your sacrifice." Elena smiled, thinking about her pillow and its journey from university dorm room to interstellar nest material. It had been a good pillow, faithful and comfortable, with her through late-night study sessions, homesick tears, and the occasional bout of insomnia brought on by too much caffeine and too many research deadlines. But honestly, watching 12 alien babies sleep contentedly in a nest they'd built from her offering felt like a much better use for it than just supporting her head for a few hours each night. "Besides," she added with a grin, "I was getting kind of attached to those little destroyers myself. Hard not to love something that approaches furniture demolition with such artistic integrity and scientific precision." Captain Zextar's forearms crossed in what Elena had learned was an expression of amused approval, though she suspected there were deeper currents of emotion running beneath his controlled exterior. When we reach the diplomatic station, I will ensure you receive compensation for your loss, a replacement pillow of the finest materials available. Oh, I don't think it's a loss at all, Elena said, watching little Krikstal twitch in his sleep, probably dreaming of new furniture to conquer. I think 12 new pack siblings is a pretty good trade for one old pillow. Besides, any replacement would just be a thing. What I gave them was part of myself, and what they gave me back was worth so much more. The cubs continued to purr softly as the ship hummed through hyperspace toward their destination, the diplomatic station where Captain Zextar would negotiate trade agreements, and Elena would present her research on interspecies behavioral adaptation. Tomorrow, they'd wake up refreshed and probably ready to tackle whatever fresh furniture they could find. But tonight, they were peaceful. Tonight, they were home, even in the cold emptiness between stars, because someone had understood what they needed and provided it without asking for anything in return except the joy of watching them succeed. Elena settled back to keep watch over the sleeping cubs, already composing her research notes about Vorthak juvenile behavior in her head. This was definitely going to make for an interesting paper when she got back to Earth, though she suspected that the peer review process might be challenging. The academic community might have trouble believing that the solution to managing young Vorthak was to simply hand over your pillow and let them tear it apart with love and instinct. But then again, the best discoveries often seemed impossible until someone was brave enough or crazy enough to try them. And sometimes, Elena reflected as she listened to the gentle chorus of purring cubs, the most important scientific breakthroughs came not from careful analysis or controlled experiments, but from simple acts of kindness across the void between species. Her pillow was gone, transformed into something far more valuable than mere comfort. It had become a bridge between worlds, a gesture of trust that spoke louder than any diplomatic treaty. And honestly, Elena thought as she dozed off in her chair to the sound of 12 purring aliens who would remember her as family for the rest of their lives, that was probably the best possible fate for any pillow in the history of the universe.